They toasted with cheap champagne over my wife's roses, announcing a wedding venue in her name while standing on the mulch she laid with her own hands. 48 hours later, when their excavator rattled up my street, the operator found a bright green sign already sunk into the soil, protected by perpetual easement. The garden belonged to a trust, and so did her name. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. My name is Arthur Hale, and I am 71 years old. I was a high school shop teacher, later a principal, and always a gardener's husband. I am a grandfather to 3, Emma is 10, Leo is 8, and June is 4. This is a story about family, but it is also a story about fences, the kind you nail together and the kind you draw inside your chest when you have to choose what gets saved. 3 months after my wife, Lydia, died, my daughter, Nora, started using a phrase I had never heard her say out loud. Activated assets. It sounded like something you would see in a PowerPoint slide with arrows pointing at boxes. It did not sound like our backyard. Our backyard was Lydia. She had carved 2/3 of our lot into a quilt of color and texture, drifts of lavender and Russian sage in June, echinacea rising like shields in July, Japanese anemone trembling pink in September. It had taken her 30 years and the patience of a saint to make imperfection look inevitable. She gave away cuttings to neighbors and students, kept a handwritten map of every plant in a leather binder, and swore the roses had moods. When I think of marriage, I think of the morning sunlight catching in the fountain she convinced me to build out of a milky blue bird bath and a salvaged pump, and the way she would flick the water at me with the tips of her fingers. Our son, Caleb, is a good-looking man with a good-looking way of talking around the point. He is married to Kira, who sells $20 smoothies by selling the idea of a life where nothing stains your shirt. They live across town in a modern house with a couch that looks like a cloud and feels like a warning. Our daughter, Nora, is sharper. She reads contracts for breakfast. She has a husband named Brent who prints his name in the air with his hands as he talks, like he is writing on invisible glass. They came to me on a Sunday after the memorial. We were still eating casseroles that tasted like condolence. The kids went outside to kick a ball along the flagstone path. Inside, Brent set his water glass directly on the oak coffee table. He called me, Art, the way salesmen do when they are about to explain my own life to me. We're here because we want to help, he said. You should not be rattling around this house alone. You know that. Nora took my hand. She has my wife's fingers, stained on the pads where impulse meets earth. Dad, I know it is too soon, but I need to say this before grief hardens into habit. The house is work. The garden is work. We can take the burden off you and turn it into something good. Good, I said. What kind of good? A place where people can celebrate, Kira chimed. We call it Lydia's Meadow. The name hit me like standing up too fast. I sat back down. Picture it, Brent said. The Hale property, transformed. Weddings among the roses. Corporate retreats by the fountain. Branded experiences. We already checked the zoning. All we need is your signature to apply for conditional use. Investors love legacy. Nostalgia sells. Legacy is not a coupon, I said. Nostalgia is not a catalog. Dad, Nora said, squeezing my hand, kindness layered with impatience, we can keep her spirit alive. By charging strangers to stand where she stood? I asked. It is better than letting it die, Kira said, the word die skidding into the room like a dropped dish. Brent flicked at his phone. We could do a pilot. The local network is hungry for feel-good content. Grandpa's garden. You give your blessing. We give a percentage to charity. Everyone wins. I stared out the back window where Lydia had tucked blue lobelia along the fence line because she said the yard needed something that looked like water when there was none. It was perspiring blue in the heat. I looked at my grandchildren hopscotching across the slate. I could hear Lydia say, without saying, "Do not let them turn this into a stage." "You can talk to my lawyer," I said. "But do not bring a camera into this house." Brent laughed, warm like a sidewalk in June. "Art, look at you, getting all legal." "I was married to a woman who made a map for plants," I said. "You learn to read fine print." When they left, Nora hugged me tight and too quick. "Think about it," she said into my shoulder. "We are offering you a way to keep her here." The next night, their talk turned from offering to taking. I learned this because my grandson, Leo, left his tablet in our kitchen. I drove across town to drop it off and parked outside their house while I called to make sure someone was home. The glass wall on the front showed the warm rectangle of their living room. Everyone looked like they were in a magazine, bathed in the kind of light you have to buy. I was about to ring when I heard Nora say, through the cracked window, "Emotion is leverage, Brent." He laughed. "Grief is an asset. You can live your whole life believing your children could never be cruel in the cold way that adults are cruel when they have a spreadsheet in front of them, and then one sentence snaps that belief like a twig under a boot." Kira said, "We will put him in a cardigan. Film him patting a rose. People will pay to be blessed by somebody else's loss." "Get the permit," Nora said. "We will frame it as a legacy project. We will have him cut a ribbon." I knocked, so I would not hear any more. They smiled when they saw me. Kira touched my sleeve and told me I was a lifesaver. Leo's tablet is literally his brain. In my truck on the way home, I realized I had been waiting for a sign. Lydia would have laughed at that. She did not believe in signs. She believed in lists, in double-checking the weather, in not planting tender seedlings until you are sure the soil remembers spring. The sign I got was not from the sky. It was from a friend. There is a man named Russell who used to teach history down the hall from my shop classroom. He is retired now and spends too much time on his porch with a hammock. He also sits on the board of a small land trust that saves pieces of green from the mouth of development. He answered on the second ring. "Art. Come sit on my hammock and tell me why you are calling me with that voice." I did not sit on the hammock. I sat at his kitchen table and mapped my heart onto his placemats. He listened like a good teacher, silent, then curious, then connecting what he heard to something you did not know you already knew. "We can do two things," he said, when I was done. "A perpetual conservation easement on the garden, and a donation of your house with a retained life estate. The easement is a recorded restriction that runs with the land, enforceable by the trust and the Attorney General. It protects the features we define. No commercial events. No filming for profit. No alterations to the plantings except for maintenance and disease. If you want the roses to stay, we will name the roses." "And the house?" I asked. "After you die, it transfers to the trust. Until then, it is yours. You get to live here. You get to watch them fail to move you out." He slid a piece of paper across the table. "But this is the part you will like even more. You can protect her name." "How?" I asked. "Trademarks," he said, "like you would say, hose. You register Lydia's name for uses related to gardens, events, and hospitality. If they launch Lydia's Meadow, you send a letter. If they make candles with her signature, you send a letter. If they tag her on a video selling someone else's grief, you send a letter. It is not about money. It is about boundaries that a court will enforce when kindness does not. I had never filed anything more complicated than a change of address. Within a week, I had filed 3 applications, her full name, her nickname, and the name she gave the garden when we used to welcome neighborhood kids in May to plant radish seeds, Hale's backyard. She insisted on the space. I bought domain names and set up a plain website with an old photo of her in a denim shirt, kneeling in the dirt, her hair in a bandana she had cut from a dress that no longer fit. The site had 3 words on it, not for sale. I called a lawyer in town who had helped Lydia negotiate a commission once, when a hotel wanted to install her planting design and then pay her in compliments. He offered me a discount and something better. He offered me the sentence, no. We moved quietly. The day after I signed the easement, the land trust brought a crew with shoulder-high stakes and a paper sign laminated in a sleeve. It said what it needed to say. A map of the garden hung beside it like a schematic diagram. A few neighbors clapped. A little girl asked if she could read the metal plaque aloud when it arrived. I told her she could. A week later, a letter came by certified mail. It was from my daughter. It was on the letterhead of a firm that spends its days articulating new ways to call greed necessary. It politely demanded that I rescind the easement. It said I had encumbered family property without the consent of stakeholders who, though not on deed or title, were part of the moral ownership of our house. I sealed my reply in a pale green envelope that smelled vaguely of rosemary because that is what envelopes smell like when your kitchen window faces her herb bed. I wrote, I love you. The garden is saved. The house will be saved. Your signature is not required to honor your mother. The next thing they did was host a party. Soft launch, Brent called it. Friends and family. A few potential donors. Have an open mind. I told him I would bring my open mind and my closed door. When I walked out back with a tray of lemonade and plastic cups, Brent was telling a story to a circle of people who wore percentages in their eyes. This path was her idea, he said, gesturing to the slate I had hauled one July in a wheelbarrow that squealed like a pig. We will widen it to accommodate bridal processions. The path stays the width of a wheelbarrow, I said, setting down the tray. Art, he said, all forgiveness, we are exploring possibilities. Russell arrived wearing a tie he must have found in the back of his closet. He shook my hand and then shook the easement sign stake to see if it was firm. It was. A woman from the city's historical commission came with a little folder titled Preliminary Findings. She had a pin in the shape of a ginkgo leaf on her lapel. She would later tell me that our house was eligible for designation not because the architecture was anything but a square box with a porch, but because the garden met the criteria for a cultural landscape. She would say the words significant and enduring. She would say integrity. I would hold on to that one. The mayor wandered in with a security detail and took a selfie with the fountain. Kira sprung toward him like a bird seeing something shiny, but he was already looking at the laminated sign. His eyes widened in a way that makes a camera want to take a picture. We are proud, he said into a microphone that Russell must have pulled from his hammock. It is not every day we get to announce an easement that will outlive us all. Announce? Brent repeated, his teeth still in a smile that had not received the new information. Announce that the Hale garden is protected, the mayor said, pointing. Cameras that were not supposed to be here, were here. The neighborhood had Instagram. Kira clapped for the cameras. Nora stepped forward, choosing her words like stepping stones in a stream she was not sure she could cross. "Dad," she said, "we need to have a conversation privately." "We do," I said. "Let me talk to my grandchildren first." Emma wanted to show me a cicada shell she had found on the back of the bench where Lydia used to sit with a book and a pair of scissors for deadheading. Leo wanted to run around the birch tree and count how many times it took to make me dizzy. June wanted to put her fingers in the fountain. We did all three. At dusk, when the light got warm and the investors got restless, Russell tapped his glass. "On behalf of the Land Trust and the Hale family," he said, looking at me, not at them, "I want to thank you for coming. We have a lot of work to do to ensure the plantings are maintained, and we are recruiting volunteers for weekly care. If you sign up tonight, you can learn how to prune roses the way Lydia taught Art." There is a silence a crowd makes when it realizes it will not be served the thing it came to eat. It is not angry yet. It is hungry and suddenly aware that its appetite might be rude. Brent broke that silence with a laugh that sounded like something stuck in a straw. "Well," he said, still smiling, "if this is how we are doing it, I guess we will do it the hard way. Let us all raise a glass to compromise." There was no compromise. The first ad appeared online 3 days later. A pastel logo floated over a soft focus photograph that captured my backyard but somehow managed to miss anything real inside it. The words "Lydia's Meadow" were written in the kind of cursive that says nothing except that the person who chose it believes cursive is sincere. The caption read, "Booking now for spring. The proceeds benefit Legacy." It was accompanied by a video of Kira speaking in her careful voice about community and love and opportunities to share beautiful spaces with beautiful people. At the end, she looked into the camera and said, "We cannot wait to welcome you to Lydia's Meadow." That afternoon, my lawyer sent a letter that began with, "We represent the owner of the registered mark Lydia H. for uses related to horticulture, events, educational programming, hospitality services, and online content," and ended with a page of polite threats and deadlines. The video came down that night. The ad turned into a not found page. Nora called me from an unknown number at 11:16 p.m. "You trademarked Mom," she said, breathless, like she had hit every red light on her way to the fight. "I protected the only thing you were trying to sell that was not yours," I said. "You do not own a person," she said. "I do not," I said. "I do own the legal right to keep you from renting our grief." "Jesus, Dad," she said, and even through anger you could hear her stumble at the edge of that name, as if it had been part of her mouth for so long it could not help but be soft. "What you do to this place, you do to her," I said. She went quiet long enough for me to hear my own breathing. "You would pick shrubs over your children?" she asked finally. "Over what you are asking me to be," I said. "Yes." The lawsuit arrived a month later with the smooth swagger of an envelope that knows it can ruin a day. It claimed the easement was a fraudulent conveyance designed to deprive rightful heirs of value. It said I was incompetent, which I will admit made me laugh. I had left the milk out for an hour that week, yes, but I still knew where our property pins were and how to read a legal description. I did not answer their allegation with the expected plea. I answered with an audit. Not of their money. Of mine. I counted what mattered and found that most of it had been miscounted for years. I had measured my success by how broadly my children smiled in photographs taken on porches I built. I had assumed the currency of a father is sacrifice in any direction they asked you to pour it. So I poured somewhere else. We established the Haynes Hale Garden Fund. I gave it the house. I gave it the binder. I gave it the index cards where she recorded the date the peonies broke ground each year. I donated a small rental duplex I had kept from a lifetime ago when principals were paid less than plumbers and you had to be clever to retire with dignity. The fund's purpose was written in simple language: keep the garden as she kept it. Teach children how to hold clippers. Host free classes for anyone who wants to learn the names of things we live among. A local college agreed to place intern horticulturists with us. The director of the city's park said he would send his crew after storms to haul branches to the curb. A man who had never spoken more than 4 words to me in 10 years brought a wheelbarrow and an apology for not seeing me before now. Brent tried one more angle. He mailed glossy brochures to my street, to my church, and to my barber, who laid them out on the waiting room table for me to collect. They offered pop-up ceremonies in a curated garden space. They used a photo taken from the sidewalk through the slats of our fence, a sliver of my life turned into bait. I sent one letter. It said, "I will not police your hearts. I cannot stop you from wanting what you want. But you will not use her name, her map, or her garden to get it." Then I did the thing I had been dreading and delaying because it suggested a decision I still hoped not to make. I changed my phone number. You do not think you will ever sever the line that can carry your granddaughter's voice into your kitchen while you are stirring soup. You do not plan to live in a world where your son's face shows up at your door and you do not open it. But fences are not just rails and nails. Fences are promises you keep to the dead so that you can live with yourself while you keep walking. The city hearing for the historic designation was the day Emma turned 11. I know because I had saved a birthday card in my glove compartment to remind me there are still paper ways to say I love you. The commission listened to Russell talk about lineage and Lydia's plant lists. They listened to the woman with the ginkgo pin talk about integrity. They listened to a neighbor read a letter signed by 62 people who lived within 4 blocks and had taken basil from our pots in August because Lydia told them to. Then the chair leaned into her microphone and said, "Approved." 2 weeks later, I issued a different kind of statement. I sold the duplex and used the proceeds to purchase the lot behind our alley, an unbuildable slice of land that had been the subject of teenage dares and Sunday morning dog negotiations for as long as we lived here. The owner had been sitting on it like a dragon sits on something that cannot hatch. He took my cashier's check and grinned. He did not ask what I was planning. We cut a gate into the back fence. The land trust found a donor to pay for a path that ran from our alley to the next street, lined with bee balm and sedge. We put a bench halfway down. We called it the Lydia Lane, not on paper, not anywhere that a lawyer could pick at it, but in our mouths when we invited kids on bikes to use it as a shortcut. The first day it opened, a boy pushed his mother's grocery cart through with a concentration that made me feel like I was watching a man cross a river with a baby in his arms. I saw my grandson, Leo, on his scooter at dusk that week. He stopped at the gate and looked at me through the slats. He said nothing. He did not have to. Silence is a language you learn when you live between adults who have made war out of their own names. "Do you want to see the fountain?" I asked. "I can show you the trick your grandmother used when the pump hiccups in August." He shook his head, not because he did not want to but because he was not allowed to want to. He scooted away with his shoulders stiff like a parade. I stood with my hands on the top rail of the gate and counted to a number we had only ever used when we were trying to make a toddler forget a skinned knee. They pushed their lawsuit until they realized it had no bone to gnaw. They pivoted to a smear campaign online in which I was painted as a miser in a crown of thorns who preferred vines to family. I did not answer. The land trust answered with a photo of a 70-year-old man kneeling in mulch beside a volunteer who could have been me 30 years ago, learning to cut roses without getting pricked. At Thanksgiving, not that the date matters anymore, because days without family are just days, Emma left a paper crane on the bench on the alley path. The note tucked into the crease said, "I still love Grandma's garden." It did not say, "Hugh." It did not have to. I had trained myself to accept crumbs as proof of a loaf. The last night I slept in the big bedroom I shared with Lydia, I took her leather binder down from the shelf and ran my finger over the ink where she had written, Peony Division, April. I did not read any message from her because she was not a woman who left messages in binders. She left dirt under her nails on the back step and a kettle that whistled like a friend. In the morning, I moved into the small apartment above the garden shed that we had imagined as a guest space for visiting botany students. I painted the walls a color she would have called, whatever the opposite of beige is. I placed a cot next to the window that faced the birch. I put a kettle on a hot plate and waited for it to sing. It did not sing. It sputtered like an old man clearing his throat. It was perfect. The foundation board meets in our dining room on Tuesdays. The chairs scrape the floor in the same pattern we used to make with dinner guests, and strangers say, "I feel like I have been here before," because that is what a real legacy is, the sensation that you are not a stranger somewhere that never needed to be sold. People ask me if I am lonely. I tell them, truthfully, that the early mornings are the hardest, when the light comes in at an angle that makes you think somebody is in the doorway if you squint. I tell them that I miss my grandchildren like a password I keep typing wrong. And then I tell them about the 7th grade science teacher who brings her class in April and makes them kneel in the wet dirt while they say the words for what they are touching. I tell them about the retired mail carrier who sits on the bench on Tuesdays to read a book about Shakespeare's plants and never notices when the light leaves the day. The last time I saw my son, he was standing across the street with his hands in his pockets like a boy being told he could not have an ice cream because dinner was in an hour. He crossed when he saw me. He tried to smile. He did not know how to stand without looking like a defendant. "Dad," he said. "Can I talk to you?" "You can," I said. "Can we fix this?" he asked. "You can bring your children to the garden when you are ready to be here without taking anything," I said. "You can sit on the bench and tell them the name of the plant that is humming in July. You can teach them to deadhead, and then you can leave. That is what we can fix." "I do not know if I can live like that," he said. "You already do," I said. He left without hugging me. That is a fact I record here without asking for pity. The ledger of what I have chosen has 2 columns, and I live with the arithmetic. The day before the first spring tour this year, I found a chip of slate buried under the thyme at the edge of the path. Lydia had wanted thyme there because it releases its scent when you brush it, a plant that rewards you for clumsiness. The chip was the shape of a blade. I washed it in the fountain and pressed it back into the place where it fit, like a tooth. At noon, 6 children walked the path while a volunteer explained what a perennial is. A man in a Yankees cap asked if the roses had names and I told him they do because everything we love eventually needs a name to stand up on. The mayor came alone and did not take a selfie. Russell leaned on a rake and looked at me the way a friend looks when the thing you plan together is not a plan anymore but a fact. At the back gate, a little girl slid her hand into her grandmother's hand and asked, "Can we come back here forever?" "Forever is a long time," the grandmother said. "But yes. Forever." I am not a religious man, but if there is language big enough for what I felt then, it is not legal, and it is not sentimental. It is the opposite of beige. After the tour, I swept the slate path by myself. A robin watched me from the birch, her head doing the quizzical tilt that birds inherit with their bones. The sun burned low. The fountain sputtered and then settled. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat on the bench on the alley path. A paper crane fluttered at my feet, caught in a tangle of time. I did not pick it up. It belonged here now. People think revenge is fire. They imagine flames licking letters into doorways and the satisfying crack of something expensive breaking. I learned that real revenge is a gate on a hinge that swings for everyone except the people who try to lock it for themselves. It is a legal line in a county book that says no to a camera. It is a trademark certificate that teaches the difference between a name and an asset. It is a boy on a scooter who gets to grow up in a town where his grandfather chose a garden over a feud. I cut ties with my family. I did not cut the roots of what made us one. The garden stands. My wife's name is not a product. The bench is smooth where 100 strangers have rested their hands, and if you put your ear close to the fountain on a still morning, you can hear what Lydia used to say without saying, and it sounds like water deciding to fall. I am not naive. Years from now, someone will try again. A developer will smell money like a raccoon smells fruit. A cousin twice removed will discover the sentence, moral ownership, and stroke it like a cat. When that day comes, the land trust will open a file with my wife's name on it, and a lawyer will use the word integrity in a room where people have forgotten what it feels like to hold a living thing without asking what it pays. I will not be here. My children may or may not stand outside the gate and remember that I asked so little. My grandchildren may or may not tie a ribbon to the birch on the anniversary we never celebrate anymore. The fountain will sputter in August, and someone who was not born when we wrote this will know the trick to get it going again. If you pass a garden with a low fence and a green sign and a bench that has learned the curve of stranger spines, sit down. It might be ours. It might be somebody else's. Sit anyway. There is a good chance the person who protected it lost something that does not grow back. I am not whole. I do not want to be. Wholeness is for things with no history. I chose a smaller life with edges I could name, and I leave the bigger life to those who could not keep their hands out of the till. I will not see Emma at middle school graduation. I will not smell the top of June's head after she falls asleep on the couch. I will not teach Leo how to coax a clogged pump. My punishment is my peace, and my peace is my punishment. When the wind slides down the alley and rattles the birch, the lane hums like a promise kept. I lock the back gate at dusk. I pocket the key. I walk inside and put the kettle on. The water decides to sing. And when it does, it sings only one name.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.